First and foremost, you use the term cultural Marxism. I thought we weren't supposed to use that term after Jordan Peterson made it a bad word. Um, you do define it in the book. How would you define cultural Marxism?
Okay, so with regards to cultural Marxism, this has nothing to do with what Jordan Peterson is saying. It
Mhm.
has nothing to do with the conspiracy theory, which is pretty much another way of saying the Frankfurt School and having, if you will, this anti Semitic, oftentimes rhetoric by using the term cultural Marxism. No, it has nothing to do with that. This is more in tune with using Marxist analysis of culture and using a variety of different theorists who may have opposing views, such as, for instance, um, the members of the Frankfurt School, or Althusser, or
Mhm.
Gramsci, who talks about cultural hegemony, looking at ideological state apparatuses, and more specifically, the mass media and the media ideological state apparatus, bringing in the ideas of the Frankfurt School, like their ideas pertaining to the media and the cultural industries, and bringing all these different elements together, somewhat picking and choosing what suits this analysis best. So, yeah, it's something more of a trying to take different ideas from different scholars to explain what's going on in the mass media today. It has nothing to do with, again, the kind of cultural Marxism that someone like Jordan Peterson's talking about. And we've
Yeah.
seen that he really doesn't know much about what he's talking about when it comes to Marxism. I've picked up a book of his or two where he tackles the subject. I was here in Toronto at the debate with Slavoj Zizek. Unfortunately, if he was in a course on Marxism, he wouldn't he wouldn't pass that grade. He wouldn't pass. He doesn't know much pertaining to it.
How did you like that debate with him and Zizek?
Honestly, I thought it was pretty entertaining, and the best thing was seeing how many people ended up agreeing with Zizek when they saw in front of them an articulate, self-described Marxist, Hegelian, Lacanian theorist who was actually very well prepared to go toe to toe with Peterson. And yeah, I went with a friend. I saw a bunch of other friends and colleagues. It was a fun time, and it was even more fun knowing that the Toronto Maple Leafs were like in the playoffs, just playing the street, and we had a packed arena ourselves.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was crazy. It was crazy. So many people were there, and yeah, it was sold out. I want to
W-
say.
Would you say it was majority Jordan Peterson fans?
To be honest with you, I'm not sure. I mean, there were a lot of Jordan Peterson fans, that's for sure. And even people that I know who went there found some of his ideas to be somewhat appealing.
Mhm.
But at the end of the night, they found themselves agreeing with Zizek and seeing how ill prepared Peterson was actually made them somewhat see the light, if you will, that this man isn't as well informed as they think he is.
Hmm. Interesting.
Yeah, that was interesting for me. So I went with somebody, actually a good friend, a colleague from the university, and he's not the biggest fan of Zizek, and he certainly isn't a fan of Jordan Peterson. But at the end of that debate, he found himself actually really liking Zizek and researching him a bit more, picking up a book of his. So he came across as yeah, well informed.
Hmm. Well, let's get back to your book, which is very informative. Again, wherever you guys are watching or listening to this show, there's a link in the description so you can pick up the book. Um, Your book explores how capitalist media legitimizes far right ideologies. Can you explain how this process works, especially in times of economic crisis?
So, in times of economic crisis, what we see is a lot of people are upset, and rightfully so, with the status quo. They're upset with traditional political parties. They're upset with politicians. They want to see some kind of change. They want to see their lives improve. During these times, especially in most Western societies, where political parties, up until I would say the 2008, um, 2000, let's say 8, 2011 global financial crisis, because again, I'm also considering Europe, and they were in a really terrible state during the mid 2010s, like Greece, Portugal, Spain, Italy, and so on and so forth. Or the UK, Brexit, of course. 2016, we have the election of Trump. But around 2008, what we see is this breakdown of this traditional kind of center right, center left dominance in politics.
Mhm.
These two parties had become somewhat indistinguishable between them, having, for example, a lot of the same financial policies. Maybe the center left was a little bit more generous and still upheld something of a welfare state. And the real differences being, if you will, if there were any, on some social policies. So seeing this breakdown, seeing people being frustrated with the status quo, they start looking elsewhere for, if you will, solutions. Obviously, you have the left, which is ever present but somewhat marginalized. You have these socialist parties, some radical social democratic parties, and so on and so forth. Or even within some of these center left parties, you have these more radical socialist voices that oftentimes are ignored and or overlooked. And then you have the emergence of the far right, which, going back to the emergence of the original fascist in Italy with Mussolini, and later on seeing far right political parties and movements start to appear all over Europe in the period between the First and the Second War, in times of crises, offering a different kind of solution, an alternative to both the traditional political establishment and the left. These parties bank on nationalism, chauvinism, xenophobia. They
Mhm.
try and muster, if you will, people around a common enemy. The people, as they like to say, facing some sort of enemy. We saw, like, for instance, the rise of anti-Semitism and attacking Jewish people during that time. Or you see, for instance, attacking other minority groups. Today, you see it's this almost full-blown, again, war on immigrants and
Mhm.
refugees, the othering and the, again, demonization of particular groups. So this all leads to the appearance of this other alternative, which oftentimes oversimplifies situations. They don't have the kind of, if you will, deep economic analyses that the left has. They stay away from things like Marxian economics, or trying to explain how the economy functions, or society, social structures, all these things that you hear professors talk about, and left wing politicians, activists, and so on. They have a much more simplified message. So this brings us to the media.
Mhm.
The media loves simple. The mass media loves, if you will, simple, kind of black and white narratives. The media loves these kind of approaches to politics, like good versus evil and blah, blah, blah. So on the one hand, you have a group with an oversimplified message, one that actually resonates with a lot of people, one that becomes quite popular in times of crises because they offer the kind of explanations that tend to convince a lot of people instead of getting into these deep, like, again, analyses of how the economy functions and politics. This is all very appealing. And the way that it's appealing to a lot of voters, it's also appealing to the media. And then there's other components. As I said, they're nationalistic, they're xenophobic, and so on. This spells controversy as well. And as you know, nothing serves the modern commercial media more than controversy. Controversy sells, right? Sensationalism sells. So what you have slowly by slowly is this perfect storm, if you will, emerging, where everything seems to fall into place for these extremist political parties. And then there's also the fact that, unlike the left, they don't challenge capitalist power structures. They talk about the elites and going toe to toe with the elites, but their elites aren't, if you will, the super wealthy. Their elites aren't individuals who are taking advantage of workers. No. Their elites are university professors, members of minority groups. They're everybody. They're, for some reason, I don't know how, refugees and immigrants become elites, but for some reason, they're also piled up with them. And all of this tends to be, if you will, reproduced in the mass media, which, even when it's critical, has the tendency to benefit the far right. Now we can get into that a little bit more because I understand I'm like going on and on
No,
because
no, no. You're fine. You're fine. You're fine.
such
You're
a
fine.
such a like uh a broad, if you will, kind of like statement of, yes, they prefer the far right because they're controversial and controversy sells. But it's also the fact that they don't challenge power structures the way that the left does. They don't talk about, for instance, media concentration, and they don't talk about a lot of these topics that we find to be highly problematic. They might just talk about, I don't know, fake news and the fact that they may challenge their leaders. But from there on, we can even get into that and why these media platforms continue to report on these groups.